only illuminated by the faint glow of streetlights seeping through the curtains. Sarah sat on the couch, flipping through channels but not really watching anything. Her parents had gone out for a dinner party, leaving her alone for the next few hours. At first, the solitude was relaxing. The house felt calm, and she enjoyed having the space all to herself. But as the hour dragged on, an odd feeling began to settle in her chest, a sense that something wasn't quite right. The sound of the wind outside started to sound like whispers. She dismissed it as her imagination playing tricks on her, but it was hard to shake. Then there was a soft thud from upstairs. Sarah froze. Maybe something fell off a shelf, she thought, trying to calm her nerves. But the noise didn't stop. It came again, this time sounding like footsteps. She turned off the TV, plunging the room into silence. Her heartbeat quickened. She listened, straining to hear over the eerie quiet. Another creak from upstairs. Someone was walking in the house. She stood up slowly, careful not to make any noise. Grabbing her phone, she tiptoed toward the stairs, her hands trembling. Should she call her parents? The police? She hadn't seen anyone break in, but the sounds. They were undeniable now. Closer. Taking a deep breath, she started up the stairs, her footsteps barely making a sound on the soft carpet. As she reached the top, she could hear the footsteps coming from her bedroom. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She gripped the door handle and slowly pushed the door open. The room was empty. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized something even more terrifying. Her window was wide open, the curtains blowing in the wind. Someone had been here, and they might still be close. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when Mia found herself home alone. Her parents had gone to visit her grandmother, and she was left with nothing but her homework and the eerie quiet of the empty house. At first, it felt like any other day. She spread her books across the kitchen table, put on some music, and started working on her math problems. The sun filtered through the windows, casting warm beams of light across the floor. It was peaceful, until the knocking started. It was faint at first, just a soft tap-tap at the front door. Mia thought nothing of it. Maybe a branch was hitting the side of the house in the wind. She turned up her music and went back to her homework. But then it came again, this time louder. Knock, knock. Mia froze, her pen hovering above her notebook. Slowly, she pulled off her headphones and listened. The knocking continued, steady and rhythmic, like someone was standing on the other side of the door, waiting for her to answer. Her heart raced as she walked toward the front door, her footsteps silent on the hardwood floor. She peered through the peephole, expecting to see a delivery person or maybe a neighbor, but no one was there. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Should she open it? She glanced through the side window, still no one. The street was empty, bathed in the golden glow of the afternoon sun. She took a deep breath, unlocked the door, and opened it just a crack. The knocking stopped. There was no one in sight. The porch was empty, the yard still. Mia stepped outside, looking around, but there was no sign of anyone. Puzzled, she shut the door and locked it behind her. As she turned to go back to the kitchen, the knocking started again, this time from inside the house. 2. The silent visitor. Jason had never liked being home alone at night, but at 17, he couldn't exactly tell his parents that anymore. They had gone out for a rare date night, leaving him in charge of the house. He told himself it was fine. He had his video games, the fridge was stocked, and the evening would go by quickly. But as the hours ticked by, the house began to feel different. It wasn't the usual creaks and groans of an old house settling. It was a deep, unsettling silence, as if the house was holding its breath. Jason tried to ignore it, keeping the TV loud and scrolling through his phone. But every now and then he would feel it, a soft breeze on the back of his neck, as though someone had walked by. He checked the windows, all closed. The back door too. Nothing was open. Shrugging off the chill, he went back to his game, his focus slipping as his mind replayed the strange sensations. He told himself it was just nerves, nothing to worry about. After all, he was home alone in a big, empty house. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. Jason jumped, nearly dropping the controller. His pulse spiked, and he stared down the dark corridor. He hadn't heard anything fall, no glass breaking or things toppling over, but the sound had been unmistakable. Slowly he stood up and moved toward the hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. His footsteps echoed in the quiet house, each step making the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. He turned the corner into the hallway and nothing. Everything was exactly where it should be. No broken items, no signs of anything out of place. But as Jason turned to head back to the living room, he saw it, just for a moment, out of the corner of his eye. A shadow, standing perfectly still at the end of the hallway, and it was watching him. 3. Midnight snack. Rachel always loved having the house to herself. At 21, she was used to the quiet since she worked from home. Her parents were out of town for the weekend, and she had the whole place to herself, perfect for a weekend of binge-watching and snacking. It was well past midnight when she got a craving for something sweet. She grabbed her phone, paused the movie she was watching, and padded down to the kitchen. The house was still, the only sound the soft hum of the fridge as she opened the door. She rummaged through the shelves, debating between leftover pizza or ice cream, when she heard a creak behind her. Rachel froze, her hand halfway to the freezer door. She waited, holding her breath, listening. Nothing. Just the house settling, she thought. Houses make noises, especially old ones like hers. She grabbed the ice cream and closed the freezer door. But then it happened again, this time louder. A soft creak, like footsteps on the floorboards, the kind of sound that only happens when someone is shifting their weight. Rachel's heart skipped a beat. She turned, her eyes scanning the kitchen. It was empty, just as she had left it. The hallway leading back to the living room was dark, the light from her phone casting a dim glow over the walls. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. There was no one there. She was just being paranoid. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She grabbed her ice cream and headed back to the living room, but just as she reached the doorway, she heard it again, this time, closer. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming from behind her. Rachel spun around, ice cream forgotten, and stared into the dark hallway. Nothing, just empty space. Her mind raced. She swore she had heard it, footsteps clear as day. But now there was only silence. She stood there for a moment, waiting for something, anything, to happen. And then, from the darkness of the hallway, a voice whispered, "Are you hungry too?" Someone had been here, and they might still be close. Someone had been here, and they might still be close. Someone had been here, and they might still be close. Someone had been here, and they might still be close. Someone had been here, and they might still be close. Someone had been here, and she hadn't expected to be left alone tonight. Her parents were supposed to go to a dinner party, but originally Emily was going to go to her friend Sarah's house for a sleepover. But when Sarah came down with a cold, the plan had been canceled at the last minute. "You'll be fine for a few hours, right?" her mother had asked before leaving. Emily had nodded. It wasn't like she had much choice. She was 16 after all, old enough to be home alone. The house felt different the moment the car disappeared down the street. Emily stood at the window, watching the taillights until they were out of sight. She turned away, shrugging off the eerie feeling that always seemed to settle in when she was alone. It wasn't the first time she'd been by herself. Usually she enjoyed the solitude. But tonight, something felt different. The house seemed quieter than usual, the shadows darker. She took a deep breath and reminded herself that everything was fine. The clock on the wall showed 7:15 p.m. They wouldn't be back until around 10, so she had a few hours to herself. Emily wandered into the living room, flipping on a few lights as she went. She sat down on the couch and turned on the TV, hoping the noise would distract her. As the hum of the sitcom filled the room, she scrolled through her phone, checking messages from her friends and scrolling aimlessly through social media. The mindless routine began to settle her nerves, and soon enough, she forgot about the uneasy feeling that had crept in earlier. 30 minutes passed. She got up to grab a snack from the kitchen, the soft sound of her footsteps echoing against the tile floor. She rummaged through the cupboards until she found some chips and a soda, then returned to the couch. Just as she plopped down and opened the bag, a faint sound caught her attention. She paused, her hand mid-air listening. It was hard to tell if it had come from inside or outside the house, but it was there. A faint scraping noise. Emily put the chips down and muted the TV. The sound came again, soft but unmistakable. It was coming from somewhere near the back of the house. Her heart gave a little flutter, and she tried to convince herself it was just the wind. The trees in the backyard were old and gnarled, often scratching against the windows when it was windy. But as she listened closer, the noise didn't quite match the pattern she was used to. She stood up, her eyes glued to the dark hallway leading toward the back door. There was nothing unusual, just the familiar outline of the hallway and the faint glow of the kitchen light spilling into the darkness. She edged toward the back door slowly, every instinct in her body telling her to stop, to sit back down and pretend she hadn't heard anything. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, drove her forward. As she reached the door, she peered through the window pane. The backyard was empty, bathed in the dim light of the moon. The tree branches swayed gently in the wind, their shadows dancing on the lawn. Nothing seemed out of place. Emily let out a sigh, relieved that she had just been imagining things. She shook her head and turned back toward the living room. Then she heard it again, this time much louder. Her blood ran cold. It was a scraping, dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. And this time, there was no mistaking where it was coming from. It wasn't outside, it was inside the house. Emily froze, her breath caught in her throat. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The noise came again, and now it was unmistakably close. It sounded like it was coming from the basement. She swallowed hard, her heart pounding so loudly in her chest that it was all she could hear. The basement door was just off the kitchen, down a small hallway. They never used the basement for anything other than storage. It was damp, cold, and full of old boxes and unused furniture. Emily couldn't remember the last time she had even been down there. Slowly, almost unwillingly, she moved toward the hallway. Her hands were shaking as she reached for the door handle. She wasn't sure what she expected to find, but her mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The door creaked as she pulled it open, revealing the dark stairwell leading down into the basement. The air that wafted up was musty, carrying with it the smell of old wood and damp earth. She flicked the light switch, and a single bulb at the bottom of the stairs flickered to life, casting long shadows across the walls. Emily stood at the top of the stairs, her feet rooted to the spot. The scraping noise had stopped. The basement was eerily silent now, as if it was waiting for her to make the next move. She wanted to turn around, go back to the couch, and wait for her parents to come home. But she knew that wasn't an option. Something was down there. With trembling hands, she grabbed the flashlight from the kitchen drawer and slowly began her descent. The wooden stairs creaked under her weight, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air grew colder as she went deeper, and the shadows seemed to grow thicker. When she reached the bottom of the stairs, she shone the flashlight around the room. The basement looked the same as always, cluttered with old furniture, boxes, and forgotten items from years past. Nothing seemed out of place, but that didn't make sense. She had heard the noise. Something had to be down here. She took a few cautious steps forward, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and then, suddenly the light flickered and went out. Panic surged through her. She fumbled with the flashlight, slapping it in frustration, but it wouldn't turn back on. The basement was now pitch black, the only sound her own shallow breathing. Then, out of the silence, she heard it again, the scraping noise. But this time, it was different, closer. It wasn't coming from the far corner of the basement anymore. It was right behind her. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammering against her ribs. She spun around, but in the darkness she couldn't see anything. Her mind raced. Was it an animal? Or worse, someone? Before she could make sense of what was happening, she felt it. Cold fingers brushed against the back of her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. She gasped, stumbling backward, her foot catching on something as she fell to the floor. She scrambled to her feet, heart pounding in her ears, and bolted toward the stairs. She didn't look back, didn't want to know what was behind her. The only thought in her mind was getting out of the basement. She reached the stairs and raced up them two at a time, her legs shaking with adrenaline. When she reached the top, she slammed the basement door shut, locking it as fast as she could. For a few moments, she stood there, her back pressed against the door, her breathing ragged. The house was dead silent again, but her mind was racing, trying to process what had just happened. She was sure of what she'd felt, cold fingers brushing against her neck. But how could that be possible? She grabbed her phone from the kitchen counter and dialed her parents' number, but it went straight to voicemail. She tried again. Nothing. Her heart sank. What was she supposed to do? Call the police? But what would she even say? That she'd heard noises and felt something? They'd think she was imagining things. Emily walked back into the living room, her body still trembling with fear. She sat down on the couch, pulling her knees to her chest. The clock on the wall read 8:45. She only had to wait an hour and 15 minutes for her parents to get home. She could do that, right? She could stay safe for just a little longer. The house was quiet now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The shadows seemed to move in the corners of her vision, and every creak of the floorboards made her heart race. She kept glancing toward the basement door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. Then, just as she began to calm herself, she heard it again. A faint, almost imperceptible scraping sound coming from the basement door. The lock rattled softly, as if something on the other side was testing it, trying to get out. Emily's blood ran cold. She couldn't take her eyes off the door, her mind screaming at her to run, to get out of the house. But her body wouldn't move. She was frozen in place, paralyzed by fear. And then, in the silence, a single whisper echoed through the room. "I'm not alone.